We're fortunate to have Pat Tant here. Pat is the CEO of Vogue Towers, longtime supporter of the industry. And Pat was actually instrumental in forming the first state wireless association right here in Tennessee. Working next, she helped launch Alabama, Georgia, and other associations throughout the country. She formed SWAP in 2005, along with PCIA, which is now WIA. So anyway, Pat is going to be monitoring the tower panel today and introducing our guest. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I hope mine's on too. Good. Welcome, everybody. You know, every person says this, and I always look to Steve, and you know, it's the same thing you repeat, but I will say, if you do not stop and thank Steve nicely in the hallway and everybody that puts this on, you would be remiss, because it's a lot of work, but it's so beneficial to bring this many people together. I heard someone downstairs say, and not to take away from all the other great conferences, said, I so look forward to Nashville every year, you know, in the industry. And so thank you, Steve, for what you do. So I was talking to someone recently, and before I start the panel, how many people in the room was here last year for the tower panel? Don't be ashamed. Okay, so more people have, and hopefully Ron Bizik doesn't get embarrassed easy, but more people have said to me, so who's it going to be, Bizik or Page? Because it's the first year Ron Bizik's never been on the tower panel. Did you know that, Steve? Yes. Because last year he was tarpon and vertical. Well, he was tarpon / vertical, and I don't know, it was really weird. And so it's the first year, just so you know, I've had some people ask me about that. So we had to, we flipped a coin, and heads was Bob Page. So Bob Page is up here. That's where the coin fell. So, but thank you, panelists, for being here. I was talking to someone recently. I thought this was interesting. They were talking about tower success has been described as three things: a strong financial structure, excellent carrier relationships, yes, and great vendors. Probably a good assessment, right, Bob? I thought that was really good. So last year, if you were here, you know, we kind of focused on carrier relationships. We had Dave Mayo up here. Everybody kind of picked on him and Dish, and you know, tower companies not knowing what our inventory is, if you remember that. And so this year, we're going to kind of pick up one of the three, and thought we would invite a service provider. So we're going to still do the tower panel with a focus and talk about the role that service companies and providers and the construction guys all play to make the tower industry what we are. So this year we've chosen Joe Season. Joe is CEO of Ontivity, kind of new to you. How long have you been there?
Just over a year.
Yeah, just over a year. Doing a great job. I'm sure honeymoon's over. Joining Joe, of course, on the tower panel is newcomer to the panel, Mike Mackey, president of Everest Infrastructure. We have one person that works for Everest.
I got one fan. I don't have Bob's gallery right here, but I got one fan.
I know. What's funny is whether or not they get a bonus for that. Another newcomer to the tower panel, even though we've had Tillman, Alex Schwartz. Alex serves as Vice President of Development with Tillman. And we have the old-timer Bob Page and his entourage on the front row. So welcome, panelists, and we're going to kind of get right into this. And Bob, let me kind of start with you. And last year, I know we talked a lot, and we were at a totally different place 12 months ago in the 5G. We're in the throes of it. What does it mean? Kind of pick up where we left off, if we can, last year. And where are we really in that 5G build-out?
Yeah, look, I think when we think about 5G and the 5G build-out, we probably should step back in history a little bit and, you know, go back to the late teens. And, you know, that's when we first started hearing about 5G, and I think all of us said, what is it? Why do we need it? And what's the use case? And then shortly after that, you started to hear a little bit more about what is it. You still didn't have the why or use case answered. And so then the costs started coming out in the tens to potentially $100 billion, and you started saying, where the heck are the carriers going to get that kind of capital to deploy? And I think all of us pretty quickly came to the conclusion that this was going to take a lot longer to deploy than 4G, which was sort of a 4 to 6 year build cycle, and this felt more like a 10-year or more build cycle. So if you fast forward to today, I think we've now covered the what is it, we've covered the why we need it. Use cases are still a little bit undefined, and I think as long as the standards, for Release 18 and Release 19, until they're resolved, I think you're going to see relatively slow 5G build-out. And I would tell you we're in the early innings of 5G build-out, and we've got a long way to go. Ron and I were over in Mobile World Congress earlier, a month or so ago, and it was interesting when we were over there. It was a realization to me that until you get to Release 18 and Release 19, that's where the fun starts, right? That's where artificial intelligence, where you have the as they call it 5G Advanced, where you have MIMO, more MIMO uses, where you can start using blockchain. And so I think you're going to start to see 5G pick up even more over the next few years, notwithstanding the fact that there's some obvious headwinds called the economy right now with carrier spend. So it may be a little bit delayed, but heretofore we've not really had any bottlenecks as it relates to 5G build out, just because it's been relatively slow.
Right. Alex, kind of your thoughts on that, and also, just that whole impact on carrier ads and structural issues, and is it too much on towers now?
For us, we're lucky enough that, I think everybody knows we're relatively new to the industry in the U.S. And for us, 5G, those drawbacks that you might have mentioned in terms of structural capacity, space on the tower, is just not an issue for us, because all of our towers in the portfolio were built by us and built in the past 4 or 5 years, tops. We've seen real extreme growth. So we don't have the issues of having an overloaded tower or one that's not designed with carrier ads in mind. And of course, with the way that we do things, we encourage the carriers to deploy the latest technology on our towers and make it as easy as possible to do so. But I agree, I think it's the early innings as far as 5G deployment. And one area where, of course, it's impacted things is the C-band filing with FAA. And so for us, who are building so many towers, seeing that impact, of course, has had an effect on the timelines with the respect to the builds.
Right. And Joe, kind of from your side, to bring you in, and a lot's riding on 5G, right? Has been and still's going to be, as Bob said, for a few years. So what does that whole construction service side look like? Because you've got the carriers and you've got the tower companies, both you're serving.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love it when tower owners say we're in the early innings of the build-out, because that means good news for folks like us. We've been extremely busy. Our business grew 30% organically last year. So it's just been an incredible time. I know there's a lot of predictions about macro CapEx tailing off, but then we have small cells, which really will be picking up over the next few years, and we certainly haven't seen the peak from a fiber construction standpoint. So, we're busy across the entire sector, and our job, we're a people business, so we have skilled and unskilled labor building the infrastructure at the point of the sword, and our job is to keep those folks busy. So this is a notoriously difficult industry to predict from a forecast standpoint. Our job is to make sure that our resources can migrate and are fungible across different types of infrastructure.
So are you very busy?
Very busy. Very busy, yeah.
Are you, difference of busy, are you keeping up?
We are, yeah. We have very demanding customers, right? A lot of you in the room here. So, what we try to get is predictability, right? And that's hard to get. The best thing from a contractor perspective is visibility to our backlog and how that's going to roll out. We see patterns. Typically, first quarter is a little bit slow. Things pick up in second quarter, and by the fourth quarter, our customers are screaming for resources to meet their numbers, so their CEOs are on Wall Street, hitting their projections. So it ebbs and flows, and part of the challenge in our business is managing that ebb and flow. So we always have a baseline of busy, and then we have surges that we try to meet.
You have screaming busy.
Screaming busy, yeah.
So Mike, let's touch on spectrum for a minute and how is kind of the C-band work going? How has it impacted really, your world and the tower companies?
Sure. So, a little different than Alex, maybe closer to Bob. Bob's portfolio is probably a little more diverse than ours, but ours is mostly, all been acquired. So we have largely leased up towers that have older school leases. So we see right now over the last 2 years, a lot of amendment activity across our portfolio. The past year, 2022, was probably our highest growth from a top line perspective. 9% growth, kind of same store, same tower growth rate, which to us is a pretty big premium to the public tower companies. So for us, it's been a really positive evolution, in the market. We agree with Bob in the fact that we think it's going to take longer. We're a little, watching the what, as Bob said, to see, how are the carriers going to monetize this? I mean, the most important thing to all of us in the infrastructure space is the health of our customers, right? And so we've got some macro headwinds that Bob, alluded to. We've got, interest rates that are rising. Build costs are pretty expensive. So, making sure that the carriers can monetize 5G and find a real use case for it is something that we're watching. But right now, it's been great for us.
That's good news. Alex, talk a little bit about kind of the new guys. We said, Dish was here last year. They're spending a lot of money. They're the new guy, right? So how are all the new guys, whether it's broadband, Dish, whoever, really impacting your model? How excited are you over that?
Yeah, I think that, God, we've done a lot of work with Dish. I know everybody has, and that team is doing an amazing job of rolling out their network. So to think of them as the new guys, I guess relatively, but we've been working with them for a while, obviously. I think that the pandemic and generally the importance of connectivity has shown and accelerated the need for macro cell tower space. And so whether it's WISPs, other ISPs that we work with, as well as, of course, the Dishes of the world, we see, we see extreme growth across the need for space on our towers. Our portfolio is suburban and rural, and I think as the network expansion has moved out into those areas, and unlike Everest, right, we don't do any sort of amendments or mods on our tower. We process them, but nothing to the extent that they do. We've seen really great uptake in from the quote unquote new guys, the smaller carriers that still need space and are expanding their networks in the places where we are lucky enough to have assets.
How vital is all that, Bob? How are those new guys vital?
Yeah, so, from our perspective with Dish entering the market, it's rebuilding what we had a couple years ago, right? It's a fourth network. And the thing that is very interesting to us about the network is it doesn't have all the weight of a legacy network that you have to build on top of. So having an O-RAN network from day one, having a smart network, it should result in greater efficiency, lower delivery cost. And from our perspective, it's been great to work with them because they're growing their business as the demand meets itself, and so you'll be able to grow with them as they grow. So
Right.
It's been a great relationship.
So one of the things that we do is I've kind of randomly talked to different people, allow people now in the industry the last few years to kind of send some questions, what's some of the topics. Believe it or not, and you can tell who it comes from, I won't give names, but clearly us tower people, and Bob, I'll start with you, the cost of building. And they're like, can I just get some kind of input on the cost of building and steel cost, but how much is that really impacting the whole infrastructure world?
Yeah, I think for the established tower codes, the cost to build has been pretty negligible, right? Because the actual cost to build the towers has not gone up a whole lot. Where I see the cost to build being meaningful is for smaller tower companies, newer tower companies, where your debt cost have actually doubled or more than doubled over the last couple of years. You've got slower leasing that we're seeing because of some of the headwinds we talked about in the macroeconomic environment. And you still do have some incremental cost to build a tower. So that combination means that for newer tower companies, the trough that they have to dig out of is going to be a lot deeper before they get to profitability, before they get to, be able to realize some value creation.
So Joe, what about that tower construction
Yeah.
side of you? How's it impacted?
Yeah, I don't want to make any headlines here, but the cost is going up. If you think about the inputs to our business, it's people, it's fuel, and it's materials. What happened in 2022, right? So there's a tug of war and a push and pull that happens between us and our customers about who should bear that cost, right? We have a ton of backlog that was priced at yesterday's prices, and we have to deal with that. Sometimes we eat the margin, sometimes we have a conversation with the customer. So it's a constant challenge. I joke with my guys, they get frustrated sometimes with pricing, and I said, guys, listen, our customers have either people or entire teams who wake up every day thinking about how do they drive their network deployment costs down. That's just the reality. So that's the environment we live in. We have to figure out how to adapt, make the case to our customers, what extra value are we bringing to try to preserve some pricing power. But yeah, last year was tough because we got the triple whammy. We had a ton of backlog at fixed costs, so what does that do to your margins? So we'll go back to our customers and have that conversation. A lot of it happens at the local level. What's interesting is you have sort of corporate mandates or edicts on pricing, but the local folks who are trying to get stuff done and meet their deadlines are a lot more sympathetic about making sure that we can make money. You need healthy contractors, and by the way, you don't want us pivoting to other customers because you have deadlines you're trying to meet. So it's an everyday thing for us, the cost in our business and how do we manage that. And the other thing is we've got to be more efficient, right? So Ontivity was built through acquisition. We have 5 operating companies across the country. We've done things like migrate to a shared services model, so we're more efficient on the common costs across the platform. That helps us be more nimble when those pricing discussions take place.
No, that's good. That's good thoughts. Alex, comments?
Yeah, I think that, obviously costs have gone up. And I think Bob nailed it. I think if you're starting a tower company or you're a tower company whose model is predicated on building a handful of towers a year and then selling them very quickly, this is a very challenging time. Your costs are going up and multiples are being driven down just by the macroeconomic climate. But for a company like us who now has real and true scale, we really have a very solid foundation of macro towers across the country and are lucky enough to have very patient long-term capital. For us, we have really no issue weathering this cycle, right? It's cyclical of cost and inflation. We have and will remain very long-term focused. And so for us, while it's never ideal that costs go up, it has a kind of a much smaller impact than it would for a different type of tower company.
Not on your questions we've talked about. What about interest rates, Bob? How's that really impacting?
Look, it's particularly if you are a variable cost borrower and you have a meaningful amount of debt, which by definition, if you're a tower company, you're going to have a lot of debt. And you're relatively small or running relatively narrow on cash flow positive. You literally went from cash flow, like a little bit cash flow positive last year to a little bit to maybe even a little bit more cash flow negative this year, just by virtue of the fact that your interest costs have doubled or more over the course of the last year. So I think and we're starting to see it in the M&A markets. We're starting to see some portfolios come to market where people realize that, hey, we were moving a little bit forward every day, because we were generating a little bit of cash, and now they're moving a little bit backwards every day. And so they're motivated to monetize the gains that they've realized.
Right. No, thank you for that extra add. In addition to rising tower costs, what are your challenges, Mike?
Well, right now I would tell you things at Everus, haven't had many challenges. We had a great year last year. We've, had pretty tremendous growth over the last 2 to 3 years, just in portfolio, the team. We've got a great investor base, but we've got some serious headwinds that we're certainly paying attention to. We want to be, particularly diligent in the M&A market, pay attention to where multiples are, they certainly seem to be still pretty elevated. So I think the biggest challenge for us is to maintain kind of some prudence in the market right now, make sure that we are still finding ways to grow, which we're fortunate because the majority of our acquisitions activity is proprietary, in-house kind of acquisition activity. You know, we don't play that much in some of the public brokered deals. So right now, things are good, but we're certainly concerned about the macro environment.
Sure. Alex, what's the hurdles?
What, sorry?
What's the hurdles and challenges?
Well, I would say for right now, you know, one thing that's impacting us, again, because our model is different, right? We're building so much, we're not acquiring. I would say the biggest challenge right now is as it pertains to the FAA and how those timelines have sort of slowed in such an extreme way. It's something that we're eager to help with if we can to help unstick. I mean, I know that it's just a matter of how much volume they have to deal with and the resources that they have. But that's definitely something that is, you know, it feels like every year there's something. And this year seems to be the year of FAA. But, you know, luckily things are if that's your biggest challenge for us, you're in a pretty good spot.
Bob?
You know, I can't help it but to say M&A. And on the M&A front, public market values have retreated 6 turns over the course of the last year, and private market values are sort of remaining where they were a year ago, and the market seems sort of disconnected from reality a little bit. I have faith that ultimately the numbers will pan out and people will realize that higher interest costs, higher operating costs, a little bit slower leasing will result in a little bit lower M&A pricing. But right now, that's probably our biggest hurdle. It's hard to be rational and acquire.
Agreed.
So one of the, in posing this question, and this is a question that several people ask that the gentlemen are talking about right now, one of the challenges, what you did not hit on that everybody else talked about, I'll take you out of the mix, you're an M&A guy, I'll take you out of the mix, you build towers and play in the dirt, is...
Thanks, Pat.
Sorry. I told you that the newbie always gets something, right, Ron? The newbie needs something. Got 2. Well, 3.
That's right.
Yeah, I've got 3.
Let's share the love.
So I'm saying I've got one old timer up here.
Old.
Is old, O-L-E, like a southern word, old. The competition for work, carrier bills, rings, you know, how big of a challenge is that? You know, I'm gonna talk to you two for a minute. What's the competition for just that rings and work, you know?
Look, I think it's always competitive, and you know, it's always sort of pricing and terms driven. But you know, we've done okay.
Yeah, Alex.
I mean, for us, we have, and as many people in this room know, we were founded as a disruptive and strategic partner to the carriers. And what we've seen over the past 12, 18 months is an expansion of the programs and the builds that we have. And so where we had been, you know, predominantly focused and lucky enough to work with one carrier, now we're working with essentially all of them, really on strategic programs and strategic builds in a way that we've been able to have a sort of a smaller impact than I would say most as far as the CapEx reduction to the network builds that the carriers have seen. So of course, it's always very competitive. I do think that pricing, you know, always comes into play, but for us, it's much more of a strategic proposition than just a simple pricing exercise.
Good. Just want to make sure we talked about where to get the work. Bob, let's talk about, even though not to give your numbers, but what are good projections if we look at the next year or two? Everything you've talked about, you know, to not make it sound negative, what are good projections for continued tower lease-up?
You mind if I take notes?
Go for it.
We'll record it, Joe.
So we keep talking about a challenged economic environment, and you know, clearly our carrier partners are in the same environment that we are, and they're an oligopsony. And so, as an oligopsony, you can look at each other over the wall and wink at each other a little bit and say, we're all going to pull back on carrier spend. It's not like you have to deal with hundreds of different folks to do that. So it's pretty logical that our carrier partners pull back over the next year or two as we go through what it clearly appears to be sort of challenging economic times. So I would expect that we're going to see somewhat muted leasing for the next couple of years, just given the fact that the carriers are facing the same economic headwinds that we are.
Right. Mike?
So I'd agree with Bob kind of long-term that I would think the carriers will pull back. Right now, for us, the year started off, really positive. Mentioned earlier, most of ours is amendment activity, right? So we have a tremendous amount of amendment activity, both that's, commenced this year, but also in the pipeline. So I think this year should look kind of similar to what I mentioned our growth looked like last year. We're seeing a little bit more colo activity from one or two of the carriers, but the vast majority of it right now is modification work. So we expect, a strong year, but to what Bob said, costs are going up, interest rates are going up. You got to imagine the carriers are going to start to pull back a little bit.
Right. Bob, comment?
Yeah. But one thing I'll say on the leasing front is, in the long run, we think if you can weather the storm, leasing will come back, right? The carriers aren't going to not spend. It's spending delayed. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that if you can weather the storm, you'll be fine. The other thing, and we don't talk about it, but we mentioned C-band a little bit earlier, but when you move up in the frequency stack, you're going to need more sites to cover the same area that you covered before. So I think that in the long run, the business is just fine, the direction is fine, but I think in the short run, there's a little bit of rough waters.
No, that's good comments. Yeah, especially the positive on, it may take longer, but, they're going to need more. Alex, do you have any?
Maybe for us, we're a little different because, new site builds has been and will continue to be a large portion of our build in our portfolio. But as everyone knows, a large portion of our build is for high rent relocation. And while there is obviously network spend reduction, one area that we've seen all the carriers lean into is getting out of a runaway freight train that is the OpEx on their network. And so while we do expect there to be some pullback on the expansion side of leasing, we're seeing really great take up on our high rent relos, sites that we've built for one carrier where another carrier is on the same tower that we overbuilt and they're coming over. And we've also been committed, in that kind of strategic way that I mentioned, of coming up with unique ways to help them move, right? Whether it's on the services side or the like.
No, that's good. Kind of staying with the tower guys for just a minute and what you're talking about, and Michael, kind of start with you, not so much of that just M&A, somebody builds, flips, get out of it, but what about just consolidation? What do you see, or what are we thinking in terms, and Joe, we'll get back to you eventually, but what are we thinking about just tower consolidation? We used to build tower, I don't know where I'm in Nashville, we used to build towers, Steve, at Cool Spring, and we put 7 people on it. You'd go build a tower and we'd put 7 people on it. And, now we had 3 and now we're getting 4, but just that true consolidation. Are we going to get with towers, keep doing what we've seen with carriers?
So you're asking, are there going to be less and less?
No, is there going to be more tower consolidation?
Yeah,
Not
less
just,
and less tower platforms, less tower providers. I think the M&A activity will remain robust, right? There's a lot of entities that are certainly focused on M&A, whether it's us, Bob, the publics, several companies. So there's always going to be an active market, but I also think there's going to continue to be an active market for small, emerging platforms to, have a strategy in the space. And I think there's still plenty of opportunity, whether it's building or, starting an acquisitions platform. I think if you've got the right strategy and the right capital source, that's aligned with your strategy, then I think there's still plenty of opportunity for small and emerging platforms, for sure.
right. And then Bob, kind of like expand a little bit, let me make it a little more clear.
Yeah.
Even real consolidation, big boys buy big boys,
Yeah. I don't necessarily see any of the big boys buying the big boys. Maybe there's some consolidation between, 4 and 10, but probably not with the big three. From our perspective, there'll always be small tower companies. I mean, there are thousands of towers being built every year, and the big three are building tens of them. So that means that the majority of the towers that are being built by smaller tower companies. And so there'll always be guys out there building 5, 10, 20, 50 towers a year. And and most of them want to monetize over time. So there'll always be a market, if you will, and there'll always be tower companies that are out there that are smaller.
Alex, you agree?
We've done very little M&A. It's not that we don't want to, but I think to Bob's point, it's kind of a tough market right now and has been. It's been very frothy and very hot. And for us, our growth has come completely organically. And as long as we have that build pipeline that we do and the capital that we have secured, for us, we're going to be very selective about M&A and consolidation. But I think to Bob's point, I think that there are different models of tower companies and that the smalls will continue to seek that quick return on capital and sell their portfolios and do it again and roll it forward.
Right. Plus, it's hard to find because Mike's buying all of them.
Yeah, I actually think you'll see some of the private platforms continue to grow. I don't think over the last few years, public tower companies haven't been the most logical exit for a lot of tower providers. So I think you'll see companies like Vertical Bridge continue to grow. They've got a great capital source. We're no different. I think there's plenty of opportunity. With the amount of private capital in the market, I think you'll just continue to see growth in some of the private platforms. And I think, some of these emerging companies, like I said, with the right strategy, right capital, they, continue to grow as well.
Yeah. So Joe, they kind of talked about issues, challenges before. What are issues and challenges? Tower companies, you can throw tower carriers in there as well. What do they have really finding qualified service vendors? You're a great company, good track record. Is it really a challenge for them to find service providers that can work for them, and I guess more importantly, in those pay points?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the asset owners and the carriers have to decide what profile of contractor they want to work with, right? You could always find two guys in a truck, but what companies like Ontivity bring to the table are a relentless focus on safety, right? It's all fun and games until OSHA shows up at your site, right? Scale, so we can do things across the country, and quality. So we invest a lot in our people, really, to make sure that we're bringing that value proposition to our customers. So, we spend millions of dollars a year on safety alone, between full-time field safety advisors, and I call them advisors, not inspectors. We made that change because these are very experienced guys who've done the work before and coach the teams on how to do it more safely. Whether it's, we do a weekly safety call, and we've done that in English and Spanish for 10 years running without exception. So, we say safety is our core value. It's not our priority, because when you get busy, your priorities change, right? So we try to, drive that into our business. So, to answer your question, Pat, I think, that's one of the things a business like Ontivity brings to the table, is being able to have conversations about regional and national builds, having peace of mind that we're going to do it right, we're going to do it safely. And to the M&A and interest rate discussion, just want to speak to that for a second too, from a contractor perspective, because I think, rising interest rates is going to drive further consolidation on the contractor side, because the small guys, you think, Josh from Tilson in the last presentation, a friendly competitor, made some great points about us being sort of essentially a bank for the largest companies in America. When you get to how long it takes for us to get our bill out, and then how long it takes for them to pay us, I've turned into a bank for the largest businesses in America. Think about fortunately now we have the balance sheet that we can live with that, but the small guys, especially as interest rates go up, it's going to drive a lot of them, I think, out of the business and drive them to M&A at the worst time, because multiples are going to be coming down because of the interest rate. So keep an eye on the sector, because I think, I've seen more potential M&A opportunities in the first 2 months of 2023 than I did probably in the second half of 2022. So there's going to be consolidation. And as for companies at scale on the contracting side, I think our customers view us as value add because they know we're going to do the work right. we're not going to have any I-9 issues, we're not going to have any safety issues, all of that. So that's part of the equation there.
They talked about challenges. What's your challenges? I mean, is it cost? Is it workforce? What's yours?
Well, there are some things we can do about cost, and there's some that are just out of our control, right? So we do what we can to manage cost. We can't do anything about fuel prices necessarily, but we can operate more efficiently. So we're constantly looking at how do we make our business more efficient. On the challenge side, we're a people business. The vast majority of our cost and our value proposition is our people. So finding, recruiting, training, engaging, retaining, promoting our people is at the top of our radar screen. I read right after I joined the company, the board asked me to sort of do a refresh on our corporate strategy, and I won't get into the details, but I call it H2O, and the H is all about human capital. How do we do a better job of, in that pipeline I just described, of finding, training, engaging, et cetera, good people? Because, again, we have a bifurcated workforce, a lot of unskilled labor, and then a lot of very skilled labor. So managing that can be tricky. So I would say, from a challenge standpoint, it's, making sure we can build our workforce and continue to grow, dealing with ever-increasing costs on the input side, and then trying to manage sort of the ebb and flow of construction across our customer base and across our scopes of work.
Okay, no, that's great points. Kind of go back to, I wanted to circle back. We've talked different things about M&A, Mike. One thing is, what's the prediction like 1 year, 2 years out? Where are all your tower buys? Everybody's chasing them, So what's 1, 2 years like buying towers?
I'm not going to tell Bob.
Well, Bob, don't
Buying
listen.
a tower. The last 2 years, I think, as far as, public brokered processes or banked processes, it's been somewhat slow. There hasn't been a ton. There's way too much private capital chasing all these deals. So multiples, as Bob, mentioned, remain, elevated for private platforms for sure. So that's a challenge. For us, it's really going to be internally proprietary deal flow. So we do about, somewhere around 2,000 individual proposals a year to different asset owners. That could be single asset owners, that could be small tower portfolios. So that'll remain our focus over the next year to two until we start to see multiples come down on the private side.
Do you think it's healthy? Is there going to be a lot of deals?
I think it's healthy. I don't think there's a ton of deals,
Okay.
and still too much capital chasing it.
Any comment, Bob?
Yeah, no, I think we're going to continue to see prices retreat over time. I think there's a lot of capital right now that's sort of pent-up capital, I'll call it, that needs to be pushed out into the market, and I think we'll start to see a reset. You just can't have literally double-digit multiple gaps between public and private values.
Right.
That's not sustainable. So at some point, I think that gets rationalized.
Right. Does this affect your side, Joe? And how?
What's that, the
Pricing.
Yeah, and the tower sales and everything, yeah.
When tower sales happen and this consolidation on the owner, the infrastructure owner side, it doesn't impact us as much. I mean, towers need maintenance, they need upgrade, they need structural mods. So regardless of whose portfolio that tower sits in,
Yeah.
it doesn't impact that.
You get some audits or go do something, yeah.
Right.
Alex, let's talk a little bit about what you see, and I tried to come up with a phrase that it didn't sound negative, but what's not working, be it pricing models, overbills, pricing pressures, what's not working?
What's not working for us or in general?
I'm going to ask the industry, and if you want to do it,
I think
You're
in
welcome
general,
to.
I think in general, what's not working is unsustainable models in general. I mean, it's been a foundational driver of our growth, is disrupting that. And I think that there is still further growth to be had there because there's been not enough disruption that's taken place. I mean, despite our best efforts, and God knows we're trying. I think that there needs to be an adjustment in the market from that perspective on the tower, on the rent side. It's not sustainable the way it's going today. And, we're committed to and going to continue to be a disruptive force in that.
do you have any vendor resource problems?
At this time, no, we're lucky enough. I mean, we've got great partners, and I think it's been very helpful that, I mean, you mentioned it, the number one thing is predictability. And so for us to have such a sustained and predictable build pipeline on the tower side has really been able to help us not only sustain our subcontractors, whether it be on the site acquisition side or the construction side, but also to really give them a predictable amount of work over the next, even 3, 4, 5 quarters out.
Right. Well, Joe's here if you need him. So,
Yeah.
Bob, comments on what may not work?
Yeah, so for us, I think there's a couple of things that we see, long-term, we question the viability, one, and both of them are because they're built on assuming a lot of growth. One area is where you have ground aggregators who are acquiring, dirt under towers with the assumption that they're going to be able to modify rents a lot. And, good, bad, or otherwise, if they're wrong, it becomes very costly for them. And so, we just see that as a long-term probably not being as sustainable. And then the other is, as the carriers continue to work with the tower companies on cutting compact deals, larger compact deals, we do see the growth in overbills being a little more challenged because, if Crown cuts a deal with AT&T or with Verizon or whoever, they're not going to necessarily go to that overbill tower. So both of those we see as
Right.
potentially not working.
So kind of on the positive side, we'll ask the nice guy up here, Mike. So what is working? No, I'm just kidding.
Buying ground under towers and renegotiating the leases seems to work out just fine.
Touche.
Okay.
But, I guess that's just for us.
What's working well?
What's working well for us, the portfolio of assets that we've amassed, I mentioned it's been growing tremendously over the last few years. The internal team that we've developed, we've grown tremendously over the last 2 or 3 years, tripled the workforce in the last 2 years. So finding talent, we've been really pleasantly surprised with the talent we've found. A lot of, certainly young, hungry, individuals that have been in the industry but want to make, add some value. So we've been really lucky with the team that we've been able to, amass over the last couple of years. And then I'd say, internally for us is our acquisitions, strategy and having this proprietary internal deal flow pipeline allows us to be insulated from, the current markets where, as we keep saying, private multiples have not retreated down to, in line with public multiples. So for us, those things are all working. We think, it's still really healthy from what we can tell on, mod work and amendment activity across the portfolio. So, we're really excited where we ended last year and where we're headed this year. So for us, it's still a really good industry. And I think everybody would agree with that. There are some macro headwinds that we're all paying attention to. But right now, I still think things are working pretty well.
Do you have comments on what's not working?
For us personally, we'd love to, do some more tower development. We think it's really difficult with the economics that people are, agreeing to. We just, we've seen portfolios on the M&A side that we just can't see how, investors and management teams make money. We think that, contrary, along those lines, contrary to, what Alex is saying, we struggle with the build to relo model as well. We've been pitched that. Just for us, we just don't see how you can deliver returns to investors and management with that model. So personally, we think that's difficult. So, we're able to find some strategic development opportunities here and there, but to develop at scale, I think is really difficult.
Okay, well, on that note, I'm going to change some of the order and talk about something. Let's talk about high rent reloads, okay? Because Bob smiled at me and Alex smiled at me and Ron Bizick smiled at me and everybody smiled. So we're going to talk about high rent reloads, okay? Alex, let's start with you. I want to talk about how active they are, how concerning they are, how neighboring they are. I'm so glad that I'm a tower owner and I just get to ask the questions, I don't have to answer this. So just talk about it,
I mean, to answer the first question, extremely active. Again, it's a problem that has not gone away and is not going to go away. And in times when the market is tough, saving money becomes more and more impactful and more important. I know that people have different opinions about high rent relo. We're obviously very positive about it. We know it's a sustainable and very successful business model. I mean, a couple things. First of all, I think that our ability to convince someone to move over who's already on the tower, we have a very good track record and very good shot of doing that. It's a very simple equation. It's a math question. And especially if you're timing it with an upgrade versus, having faced with a decision to invest in a tower that you're getting held over the barrel on, or spending that money and moving over, usually it's a pretty easy decision. The other thing is that, people forget a tower we overbuild for one carrier might be an expansion site for another. So, choice between a public, right, that they don't have the best terms with or coming on us, we've seen really excellent take-up of those high-rent relos. And again, we're foundational to our business and to our company is being a strategic partner to the carriers, and we will continue to do so.
Bob?
Sure, I'll speak from our experience. So we've built a few high-rent relo sites over the last 5 years. A couple of observations. First off, you have a fairly low hit ratio on what you are provided and what you can actually build. So from our perspective, it doesn't feel like a scalable business. The lease up on high rent relos in our portfolio has been significantly less than our lease up on traditional BTS towers. And in fact, we see that, again, as I mentioned earlier, we see the carriers working with the tower cos and cutting holistic deals, which mitigate that second and third tenant from actually being able to go on a high rent relo site. Consequently, we just feel like high rent relo towers are not worth as much as a traditional BTS tower, just given the fact that the lease up is muted.
I mean, two things with that. So for us, and I can't speak to you guys, but our lease up on the high rent relo towers is slightly ahead of our build-to-suit towers, which is interesting. And I think it speaks to how the carriers view us and what our sales strategy is with that. It's a very different type of thing. And the other thing is, again, we take a very, very long-term view. Not that you guys don't, but I think that you're absolutely right. These new deals, it's basically like, even in my short time, I mean, I haven't been in the industry all that long, obviously. I've seen one carrier specifically not target and then target one of the big three, right? And so I think it's cyclical, and if you have a very long time horizon like we do, it's going to come back around. There's always going to be a need to keep pressure on the incumbent tower companies, as long as they are really playing a monopolistic and very negatively impacting game as it pertains to the tower leasing. So that's, I totally get what you're saying, but that, from our perspective, that's where, we net out.
Any comment back?
Nope.
Nope. Mike, any comment?
We haven't seen any impact on our portfolio as far as, high rent relos off of our sites. We certainly recognize that the carriers have, some, issues with OpEx and certainly revenue growth and are looking for ways to expand EBITDA. So we try and use our assets and be creative with some of those leases that they may view as high rent and see if there's creative ways to work with them and provide the same benefit, and which doesn't require them to spend a ton of capital to move sites. So we haven't seen it impact our sites as negatively, and we've looked at portfolios and shared Bob's sentiments on lease up. So we just haven't seen much positive in the business model, but that's certainly from our perspective, since we haven't done any of it.
One of the questions was after that for me to raise of hands, but I'm not going to do that, of pro or against. So we're not going to ask for a show of hands. Either Alex is right or Bob is right. So we are going to keep going. Okay, Steve, I have 4 minutes. Steve says I have a few more minutes. I'm going to skip. So if you see things I'm skipping there, Bob, I'm skipping because we've run out of time. So since I was talking to you, Bob, if you look 3 years, 5 years out, what do we need to keep our eye on? What is it in our industry?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that certainly I focus on. One is the new entrants. So whether it's the cable companies or the FANGs, and obviously you've got this new fourth network that has a lot of capacity. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these new entrants enter the space, and do they become customers of ours as tower companies? Do they become Dish customers? So it's certainly watching that. Guys are keenly focused on what the impact of O-RAN is on the industry. It feels like it could be a disruptor. And then last but not least, I think, it's been a while since we've had Spectrum meted out, and it'll be interesting to see what Spectrum policy is for the FCC, because ultimately that's the lifeblood for the carriers, which is really good for us as well.
All right, Mike?
I would say what I said earlier is, keep an eye on the health of our customers. Make sure that, we're all doing what we can, because we certainly rely on, the health of the operators, making sure that they're finding ways to hopefully grow revenue and monetize 5G, be creative with them on, OpEx, and see if there's ways that you can be, benefit to them. So that'll be number one for us. Two, just be prudent with capital over the next couple of years. I think, there's still some shoes to fall here on the commercial real estate and some other, things even more near term with what we're all seeing on the regional banking situation. So I think being prudent with capital over the next few years is going to be really important.
No, I agree. Alex?
I think over the next few years, it's going to be critical to remain nimble and creative. I think it's going to be an environment where there is a lot of opportunity, but it's going to take outside the box thinking and, more strategic partnership-driven mentality. And for us, because we do have such a large pipeline, it really becomes about executing. I mean, it's key for us. We have an amazing team, and we just need to deliver on, what we've built up.
Joe, your side of the world?
Yeah, from our perspective, it's really about looking into that foggy crystal ball and trying to figure out where things are going on the macro side, on the DAS side, on the small cell side, on the fiber side. So, how do we do a good job of positioning our business to anticipate those trends and be in a place where we can service the customer when things ebb and flow across our scopes of work? So that's always, pretty difficult to do. But what we've tried to do in the last year or two is increase the diversification of our business. So we have a real franchise on the DAS side now. We're trying to sort of cross-populate that across our entire footprint. We see that picking up, whether it's IDAS, ODAS, venues, whatever. And then also do more on the fiber side, because we see, although it's not here quite yet, you see, dabbling. Supposedly there's this tsunami of spend coming on the fiber side, and we want to be prepared to take advantage of that when that happens. So we have, the pistons firing at different in different subsectors, and that makes a healthy company.
No, very good. Steve says that I have time for 1.5 questions.
1.5.
1.5. I know. Sharp, let's go. Go ahead, Sharp.
High rent reload question. I don't know how long ago, but at one point in time, there were a lot of master lease agreements re-signed with the big public companies. And without having seen those master lease agreements, we were led to believe that they were for lower escalators and more equitable pricing concerning mods and changes like that. And with that intro, I was wondering, have these master lease agreements not really done what they were supposed to do? Which I was thinking that was going to reduce the number of high rent Leroys and reloads and take the pressure off the tower companies to a degree. Have I made any sense at all?
So raise your hand if you want to answer. Alex, let's go.
So I think those. I think first of all, yes, you made sense. The first thing I'd say is, if I cut your rent from $60,000 a month, your rent for an apartment that you rent, to $50,000 a month, would you move?
I'm not good with numbers.
I mean, I think that, some concession, clearly they didn't go all the way, right? Because they can't. It's core to their business model. is how those, the incumbent tower companies operate. And I would say that, pricing is just, from my understanding, right, it's just one component of those master lease agreement negotiations. And so I think that we played a part in helping to bring some of those carriers, some of those tower companies to the table. But ultimately, there's still room to go as far as where they need to go to make it a sustainable business model. We talk about helping the carriers and making sure that they are sustained and healthy partners. And I think that this is one way that we can do that.
Bob?
Sharp, from my perspective, yes, they have cut. You made sense, a lot of sense. From my perspective, the carriers have cut more holistic deals, and it makes for a limited pool of how many high rent reloads there are, right? So there will come a day when there's not a whole lot of new inventory, and that seems like it may be coming sooner rather than later.
Okay, so it has had some impact on high rent reloads. Thank you.
Does anyone else on the front row have a question?
Oh, boy.
Okay, any more? I can't. No more questions? No, Steve says that's it. If anything you want to ask, please come ask the panelists. Thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Thank you.